Hey guys, Em here from Transformers and Video Games, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at my G2 Grimlock. Now I know this isn't what most of us think of when we think about the character, but find out today if this is a version of Grimlock that you need to add to your Transformers collection. So sit back and enjoy, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. All right, now let's start off by taking a look at the oversized clamshell packaging. One thing that I do like about it is the fact that it does go a long way in keeping a figure secure and safe. One thing that I don't like about it, especially in my case, if you have a few figures that are packaged this way, it can be a challenge to store them in a way that isn't going to potentially damage the packaging. Over here, one of the features that they're advertising is die-cast metal pieces. There's Grimlock, obviously, in his bubble. Then down below here, you can see the accessories the Grimlock comes with. And anybody familiar with G1 Grimlock will note that for the G2 version, you only get the sword and the blaster. You don't get the rocket launcher or the rockets, which is kind of unfortunate. And then down below here, a couple of features that Hasbro thought were important enough to include right on the front of the packaging. Awesome dinosaur styling. Fully articulated motion. So I guess for 1993 standards, that was a big deal. And then over here on the right, you've got the very iconic G1 box art for Grimlock. And I say G1 just because Hasbro didn't even make an effort to try to color the artwork so it would match any of the G2 variants. Of course, everybody knows there's a gray G2 variant, but it would have been certainly interesting to see him in either the blue color that would match this figure or the teal color from the more rare version of G2 Grimlock. All right, now let's take a look at the back of the packaging. At the top, you can see it says, "Enter the world of Transformers where the new generation of heroic Autobots and evil Decepticons battle head-to-head in a world where things are not what they seem." And below, you can see some of the other figures that were available back in 1993 when the G2 Transformers line was in effect. I'm just going to get a little bit closer here so you can see better. These are all just repaints of popular G1 figures. I guess Hasbro thought it would be kind of a sure thing to release some of the favorites from the G1 line. And I've got to say, I really like the G2 version of Optimus Prime. I think the black trailer looks fantastic. One observation is, I guess so much for robots in disguise, since they decided to put his name in huge lettering on the side of his trailer. Now we'll take a look at his bio and tech specs. It says Autobot Grimlock, function Dinobot Commander, motto, among the winners, there is no room for the weak. Grimlock is the most fearsome and powerful Dinobot. Although dedicated to the Autobot cause, he resents authority. He is a valiant warrior, but is also cold and merciless with contempt for the weak, including all humans. He has great strength, and his jaws can break almost anything in two. He carries an energy sword and a galaxial rocket launcher in Dinobot mode. Other than arrogance and lack of speed, he has no real weaknesses. Now, it's funny that they mentioned that he has a galaxial rocket launcher when the G2 version of the character didn't, or of the toy didn't actually come with one. Okay, so let's start off by taking a look at Grimlock and his awesome Tyrannosaurus Rex mode. And if there's one thing that I always loved about the original Dinobots and these G2 versions, and that's all of the little details that Hasbro thought to include with these molds. Starting off with his head here, I'm just going to open up his mouth. And we'll get in nice and close. You can see in the bottom portion of his jaw, he's actually got a flamethrower that's been molded into place. And as much as I think that's awesome, I quite honestly never understood why Hasbro didn't paint that silver at least to make it stand out a little bit more. You can see he's got some really nice teeth. I'm just going to close his mouth now. The G1 and G2 version of Grimlock had red eyes, which is very different from what people probably remember from the cartoon. Speaking of details, you can see the really nice panel lines here on his head. Right around his jaw here, you can see that I guess is theoretically supposed to be the hinge where he opens and closes his jaw, but that's been molded into place. Right along his body, if I tilt it in the light, you can see various lines. Along his tail here, you could see some different textures along the back. Love all the different things that they've thrown in here. Like here's a factory applied sticker. That's some nice mechanical details. He's got the chromed out arms. On the underside of his body, you could see he's got this nice gold chrome piece with like a smoky, smoke-colored plastic piece that fits in here. That'll form his chest later. He does have gold chrome claws. And if you look closely up top here, you can see underneath this, again, smoky colored clear plastic, he's got some chrome mechanical details, which it looks to me like it's supposed to be like springs and cogs and various other things that Grimlock needs for movement in his various modes. The back portion of the figure, you could see he's got this nice chrome tail. Unfortunately, this one here has a little bit of chrome wear, I guess from a little bit of play over the years. Okay, well, just two more quick things that I'm going to point out before we get into articulation. On the back of the tail here, you can see this green G2 Autobot tampograph. And the only reason I point this out, obviously, if you're buying a blue or a turquoise Grimlock, then you obviously know what you're getting. But if you're in the market for either the G1 version, then you're going to want to make sure that that tampograph isn't on the figure. And if you're buying the gray G2 variant, then of course you'll want to make sure that is on the figure. For consistency with my G2 slag review that I did last week, I did want to show off the Diaclone cockpit feature here, which was never used in G1 and it was never used in G2. But in the pre-Transformers line, you had these little Diaclone drivers here that would just fit in the seats or the cockpits. So there you can see him riding in the back. And I quite honestly think that this particular cockpit is a lot more successful than what I showed off for the G2 slag figure. That one would just sort of fit inside his chest in an awkward kind of way, whereas this one actually looks like a proper seat to me. So again, I just think that this was a better implementation of the little gimmick. All right, now let's cover articulation. The head will rotate up and down like this at the neck. His jaw will open so he can reveal his teeth and his flamethrower in his mouth. His little dinosaur arms will rotate a full 360 degrees. His legs will rotate up just as far as this little piece here will let it. So he does have some clearance issues, but that's how far it'll go up. And then down, he's got some clearance issues down here as well. So not too much movement in the legs. He's got some knee articulation like this. And then these claws will fold down like that. Not sure why you'd want to do that unless you wanted to use it for robot mode. But that's it for articulation. Okay, now let's get into transformation. Now for Grimlock, I always start off at the top here. I always just fold this head right back like this. And I always lay the head flat like that on his back. Then looking at the front here, split the chest and untab them. And just fold them back like wings like this. So here's what you're looking at so far. Next, unpeg this chest piece, or what will become the chest, lift it up, and slide it into place up top here to form the upper portion of his chest. Just to complete the upper portion here of his body, you can push these in, collapse them to reveal the fist. Do the same on the other side. Now I've seen some people fold these down like this, I guess for sort of a cleaner look, but I quite honestly don't like that because at least the top one interferes with where his weapons are going to peg into place. So I always just leave them exactly the same as they were in dinosaur mode, just out like that. Now to get into the bottom portion here, there's a bit of a clearance issue. So I always just pull a little bit and wiggle it. And sorry, before I pull those around, you just want to unpeg the tail here from each other. Open it up like this. And then we continue with what I was saying with the legs. Flip them around. Here we go, almost finished. Fold this portion of the leg up like this. And that part down to give him more of a hip over here. And then do the same thing on the other side. Fold that up. And then the bottom portion down so the hips match. Then you can just put his arms back down. I just had them up so that they'd be out of the way. And that's it for transformation. Okay, this isn't going to take long, but why don't we cover articulation and robot mode. Now, starting with the head here, I just wanted to point out that it's fixed in one position, and it's actually pretty far back here. It's a shame that they didn't have a slider or something where you could slide further forward to maybe line up a little better, at least with the shoulders. Speaking of the shoulders, he does have arm articulation at the shoulders. They'll rotate this far back up until they're stopped by the upper portion of the backpack, and then they'll rotate the other way until they're stopped again by the backpack going the other way. Other than that, if you move the arms out of the way here, you can see that he can do the splits. So he can go full Jean-Claude Van Damme if he wants and do that. Putting his legs back to normal here, you can see he's got a tiny bit of upper thigh movement right there. And he does have some knee articulation, but for a G1 or G2 style figure like this, you're not really going to get much out of that. It's really because of transformation. And other than that, that's quite honestly it for articulation. Despite the limited articulation, I really think that Grimlock has an amazing robot mode. I mentioned earlier this gold chest he's got here. One thing to watch out for is make sure that your Grimlock has that smoky plastic piece in there. I have a friend that did buy one on eBay once, and that piece was missing, which is strange. He does have some die-cast parts here. This crotch area is all die-cast. You know, I think the proportions are really good in robot mode. Just off camera, I've just pushed these wings back a little bit closer to the shoulders, just because I think that's actually the way it's supposed to be and it looks better. But Grimlock's a very iconic character. This robot mode is definitely one that looks great on the shelf. Whether you're buying the G2 or the G1 version, I really think you can't go wrong either way. I mentioned earlier that he's a couple of accessories, so I'm just going to show those off right now. First off, you've got his red sword here, which I'm just going to peg into this fist. So there you go. I think that looks really good with his sword in hand. And in the other fist, I've got his gun, which I'm just going to peg into place. And there you go. There's both accessories in place. And I got to say, he looks really great when he's fully equipped here with all of his accessories. I did notice here just in this review that the left arm on mine is super loose. So you'll notice here there's an exposed screw that I think it's just a matter of me tightening that up slightly. Obviously, I don't want to over tighten anything, or you know, you tend to get things cracking or getting damaged. But I think just a little bit of tightening up and this figure should be back in tip-top shape again. One thing that I'm quickly going to mention before I forget is the location of the date stamp. And I'll read what it says on there as well. You'll notice on the inside of the leg here, if I can get it to focus, it says 1984 Hasbro Inc. All rights reserved, made in China. And the reason I wanted to point that out, it kind of goes with what I mentioned earlier about the G2 tampograph. And that's that if you're in the market for a G1 Grimlock and you don't want to buy the gray G2 version by accident, make sure that it doesn't have the G2 tampograph, and make sure that the date stamp on the inside of the leg says made in Japan, because if it says made in China, it's definitely one of the G2 variants. All right, for a little bit of fun, I thought I'd show some of my G1 Grimlock variants. I did the same thing at the end of my G2 Slag review last week, so if you haven't had an opportunity to check that out, be sure to give it a watch. Starting from left to right, we've got the prehistory animal version of Grimlock. And anybody that's not familiar with that line, it was basically an 80s line of bootleg Dinobots. And what makes them unique is that the company that produced them made a number of changes to the molds that make them really interesting, unique, and very collectible some 35 years later. In the center, we've obviously got the blue Grimlock that we just reviewed. And then on the right, we've got the standard G1 Grimlock. So I'm just going to rotate the figures here so you can get a better look at them. You'll notice along the front here of the prehistory animal version, some ridges that aren't on the standard version of Grimlock. And actually, while I'm on the topic of prehistory animal transformers, I do want to give a big shout out to my buddy Jeremy Z31 from Instagram. He's been very supportive of the channel, and he's what I would call a super fan of the prehistory animal variants of the Dinobots. Very cool guy. He's into BMX, cars, and basically 80s lifestyle. So be sure to check out his Instagram if you're on Instagram. I'll just stop here to show you the back of these figures. You'll notice here that there's 4 claws here at the front of the prehistory animal version. In the G2 and the G1 version, there's just 2 that I'm pointing out here. Even back here, you can see there's 3 fingers on the Dinosaur, on the smaller arms, versus just sort of kind of a chunk here on the G1 and G2 mold. Obviously, the bronze color of the prehistory animal version is very different as well. I just think the 3 of these figures look fantastic together. All right, here are the figures in Tyrannosaurus Rex mode, and here's where I think that especially the prehistory animal version really shines. You'll notice he's got a gold metal tongue in his mouth. And one other thing that you'll notice right away, you can really see the tongue shining there at that angle. But you'll notice he's got this extra horn here on his head that the other Dinobots don't have. Just a fantastic variant. I actually really like the look of the blue G2 version as well, just for something different. You can see that they all have the red eyes, unlike the blue eyes from the cartoon that I mentioned earlier. Now, the G2 version, I don't have stickered up, so obviously the other 2 are going to look a little bit different in that respect. You'll see on the back here, there's no diaclone cockpit on the prehistory animal version. Yeah, just fantastic. It's funny, since I bought the prehistory animal version, I haven't actually seen another one for sale on eBay since. I don't know if that's because I'm in Canada and some of the auctions aren't international auctions, but I just don't seem to have a lot of luck in finding them. All right, here we are with Grimlock back in his dinosaur mode, and I think I'm going to leave it at that for today. Now, in conclusion, would I recommend picking up a G2 Grimlock? I absolutely would. I think that these are eye-catching variants of their G1 counterparts, and quite honestly, I consider them very worthwhile additions to any Transformers collection. Now, a couple of little collector's tips that I'll share here. The blue variant that I have in hand right now is the most common version and is the cheapest one to find on the aftermarket, followed by the gray version, which looks identical to the G1 Dinobots. Only one way to tell the difference is the G2 tampograph that you'll find on the figure. And then the most expensive version of Grimlock would be the turquoise one. Now, sometimes you get lucky with that version and people will mistaken it for just the regular blue version. And occasionally you'll find them listed that way and you can get a great deal on it. Unfortunately, I haven't been that lucky yet, so my search still continues for either a packaged or a loose variant, but I'm hoping that I can find one sooner rather than later. Anyways, I hope everybody enjoyed this. Leave me a comment in the comments section, and be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thanks again, everyone. Take care. All right, third-party companies. Let's see a masterpiece-inspired version of this bad boy on the left.